I want to say hello to all the Pikes out there. We are coming to you today from the museum at the Memorial Headquarters up in Memphis, Tennessee. My name is Justin Buck. I'm the Executive Vice President for the fraternity, and I am joined here today by the Chief Operating Officer for the fraternity, Mr. Lance Horner. Today we're going to talk about one of the more important topics and probably one of the most commonly referred to documents throughout the fraternity, and that's the Fraternity Standards. Probably more so common than the Constitution, the chapter codes, but as I'm sure Lance can attest, one of the most commonly referred to documents anywhere in the fraternity. And again, that's the Fraternity Standards. So we're going to go through it a little bit today here, and kind of line by line, and maybe provide a little bit of input around each of the standards. But we want to kind of start big picture here for a minute. So Lance, when you think about the standards, what are the 3 or 4, big themes that you think about when the fraternity standards come to mind?
Sure. I think first, a uniform set of expectations for our chapters, for all our members and our alumni. It's really the foundation of our health and safety as far as guidance is for chapter operations for both our members and our guest safety.
So expectations number one. One of the questions that we get pretty frequently is, what is the fraternity's risk management policy, right? And so if you were to boil down our risk management policy into 2 pages, I think there's a lot more to it than that, but this would really be it. So I think, expectations, risk management policy, those are 2 of them. Any others that come to mind?
Yeah, conditions being placed on chapters is typically a result of chapters failing to meet the expectations as outlined in the fraternity standards.
Right, so there are consequences, when standards aren't adhered to. Okay, that's a good one. And then finally, and this one's more in the legal realm, and we really, we want to talk about all these standards more so from an expectations and a health and safety standpoint, but there certainly is a legal aspect to all of this as well. And that's, these are the exclusions in the standards from a legal liability standpoint. So just as you have, maybe texting or driving and you get into an accident, that might not be covered by your insurance policy, your personal insurance policy. Same goes with the fraternity standards. So if a chapter or a member knowingly or willingly violates one of these standards, that might exclude them from the fraternity's insurance.
Sure. So now that we've talked about big picture what the fraternity standards are, there are 6 subsections of the fraternity standards, and I think we should just get right into it. The first being alcohol and drugs. Number 1, the possession, use, and consumption of alcoholic beverages while on chapter premises during an official chapter event or in any situation sponsored or endorsed by the chapter must be in compliance with any and all applicable federal, state, and local laws and university policies.
It adheres with the law. It seems pretty straightforward, right? Follow the policies of the university and follow the law. This could also include actions that are put into place on an interim basis, maybe by the university. They're kind of broad scale. We've experienced some of that lately. Typically, it's only very short term or interim basis, but nevertheless, that's also a university policy. Now, occasionally we get the question, what if the university policy is more strict than the fraternity standards, or vice versa? The fraternity standard is more strict than university policy. Well, what is the answer to that question? Well, the case is you always yield to the more strict policy, right? So in many cases, maybe the university has a little more strict nuance, something like that. You'd want to make sure that you adhere to the university policy. So, the second standard in this area is the chapter, members, and guests shall follow the federal law regarding illegal drugs and controlled substances. The possession, sale, and or use of any illegal drugs or controlled substances at any chapter house, chapter sponsored, or co-sponsored event, or at any event that an observer would associate with the chapter is strictly prohibited. Lance, what do you think?
Yeah, again, pretty straightforward. We're aware that there are a lot of state laws that vary in position on marijuana. That said, most universities are pretty aligned, as is the International Fraternity. It elects to align itself with federal law, which means any fraternity activity whether in-house or not, marijuana, just as other drugs, are prohibited.
That makes sense.
Number 3, alcoholic beverages present at chapter events shall either be provided and sold on a per drink basis by a licensed or insured third-party vendor, or brought by individual members, guests, through a bring your own beverage BYOB system.
So this is the presence of alcoholic beverages, right? So if the chapter is going to host an event where alcohol will be present, that alcohol should either be brought individually by the member or the guest, hence the whole idea of BYOB, right? Or it should be distributed by a licensed, and I think it's a very important distinction, licensed third-party vendor. Doesn't mean you just go, hire your friend Bob down the street to distribute the alcohol, right? I mean,
Sure.
He is not a licensed vendor. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this whole concept here in a minute. So that takes me to number 4, which is the presence of alcohol products above 15% ABV, which is alcohol by volume, is prohibited on chapter premises at all times. Alcohol products above 15% ABV may be served off chapter premises by a licensed and insured third-party vendor.
15%. Let's not get too caught up in the percentage of this. It's commonly referred to as the hard alcohol ban. Now, most fraternities, including the NIC, have the same policy. It means that if you have alcohol in your house, it shouldn't be over 15%, which is typically, everything else is typically alcohol and wine. There's no hard alcohol in the house. At any official event, if hard alcohol is present, it should be distributed, again, by the licensed third-party vendor. Again, subject to all state, local laws with respect to legal drinking age.
That's right. I mean, legal drinking age being 21, I think probably doesn't need to bear repeating, but we do have to acknowledge what the laws are, right?
Sure. The purchase or use of bulk quantity or common sources of alcoholic beverages by a chapter is prohibited.
Yeah, and so this is standard number 5 under the alcohol section, right? Bulk quantity. What are we talking about here? When with bulk quantity, this is a keg. This is cases of beer, 12 packs, racks, whatever your local vernacular is. Cans, bottles, bowls or trash cans of some kind of common source. I'm not sure why anybody would want to drink anything out of a trash can, but basically anything that is mass quantity and there is unfettered access to it. Unfettered means unrestricted, right? And so why is this important? Yes, from a risk management and legal standpoint, if you do this, yes, your insurance could be declined and all of those type of things. But bigger than that, it's really from a health and safety standpoint. I mean, you have no idea how much somebody is drinking if they can just go and get it whenever and wherever they please, right? And so, I mean, again, the standards, health and safety, we're trying to take care of our members, we're trying to take care of our guests. So we don't want unrestricted access to just unlimited amounts of alcohol. It's simply unsafe. So that takes us to number 6. Under alcoholic beverages shall not be purchased through the chapter treasury, nor shall any individual member undertake to purchase or coordinate the purchase of alcoholic beverages for fraternity, members, or guests in the name of or on behalf of the chapter. What are we talking about here, Lance?
Now, this is really just a continuation of the prior issue. Not only bulk quantities of alcohol, but it's kegs. You talked about racks or cases or even one bottle. Purchasing it through the chapter treasury is prohibited. And it really doesn't matter, right? Whether it's a chapter's debit card or writing checks. I don't know who continues to do that. But having someone buy it and then get reimbursed by the chapter or in some type of pass the hat, slush fund, Venmo, PayPal, you name it, cash. The reality, it's a violation of every fraternity's risk management policy and probably most every university's for that matter. Moreover, it puts the chapter officers, and the individual doing it who contributed to it at a really severe risk because accidents do happen.
You mentioned something there, and I know you're going to get to number 7 here, but like all of these policies, right? These are not necessarily unique to Pi Kappa Alpha. I mean, every fraternity, every university has something very similar to what they would call the standards that their members and their chapters are expected to adhere to. So
Certainly.
this is not something that's unique to Pi Kappa Alpha.
So number 7 I got for you. A chapter shall not co-host or co-sponsor or in any way participate in an activity or event with another group or entity that purchases or provides alcohol.
Right. So this is really a continuation of the ones we discussed in number 5 and number 6. And while I'm sure that no Pike undergraduate would ever think this, this isn't really an opportunity to get around the other standards by having some other organization, be it a fraternity or whomever, provide the alcohol, and then you reimburse them on the back end. I'm envisioning some type of scenario like a quid pro quo where, Lance, you're another fraternity and I'm Pi Kappa Alpha, and hey, we're going to go ahead and buy the venue and the transportation. You go ahead and purchase the alcohol. We good here? Like, yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. So again, you hate to think of these things from a worst case scenario, but all of this ultimately comes out. All of these under the table dealings and handshake deals and discussions and text messages, that arrange all these things, all of that ultimately comes out when, unfortunately, an incident or an accident occurs. So let's move along to number 8 here under alcohol. A chapter shall not co-host or co-sponsor an event with a bar, event promoter, or alcohol distributor. However, a chapter may rent a bar, restaurant, or other licensed and insured third-party vendor to host a chapter event. A lot of language there, Lance. What are we talking about?
Pretty important distinction here, Justin. Yes, chapters can certainly rent third-party venues, and in many cases are encouraged to do so. The distinction here would be they cannot co-host an event with this place directly, especially if they're providing alcohol directly or engaging in some type of activity that would be violating the fraternity standards. I think the clearest example of this would be XYZ fraternity is co-sponsoring an event at X Tavern, and they're classifying it as a philanthropy. Co-sponsoring versus at a venue. In exchange for services, cover charge at the door, bar tab, anything of that nature. In addition to the fraternity standards, I would think there might be concerns about the chapter and the image they're portraying, especially as it relates to an event at a bar, potentially with alcohol, for good. From a social media or what have you standpoint, I'm sure they would be concerned about their image.
I think that's a good point. I mean, like that last distinction. I mean, we want to make sure we're talking about all these standards from a health and safety standpoint. Yes, from a risk management standpoint, but there's also like a PR and branding standpoint. Hey, it's a fraternity. We're a social fraternity. We want people to have a good time, do so in a healthy and safe manner. But think about, when you're co-sponsoring an event or something like that, who you're co-sponsoring it with and what type of image that portrays to the general public, right?
Number 9 for you, under alcohol and drugs, attendance by a non-member at any event where alcohol is present shall be an invitation only, and the chapter shall utilize a guest list system. Attendance at events with alcohol is limited to a 3-to-1 maximum guest to member ratio. Furthermore, attendance shall not exceed the local fire and building code, capacities of the chapter premises or host venue.
So this 3-to-1 member to guest ratio, this was kind of a new phenomenon within the last, handful of years. And some people got some pushback, but again, this is not unique to Pi Kappa Alpha. It's pretty common amongst all fraternities. In fact, the 3-to-1 ratio is almost industry standard. And a lot of universities have similar language as well. So this is a pretty important one. Obviously the chapters need to make sure that they're aware of the building codes and whatever capacities of the buildings or venues are adhered to. But what we're really talking about here is guest lists And then again, total number of people with that 3-to-1 ratio in mind. The idea of not hosting open parties. This is not a new concept. So why are guest lists important? We talk about guest lists all the time. I can think of a couple different reasons. And yes, chapters, if they're going to have a social event, especially one with alcohol, there should be a guest list, plain and simple. You want to know who is at your event, first and foremost. You want to know who's there. I can't tell you the number of times, and I know you've had these calls as well, that someone alleges something has happened, and when speaking to chapter officers, there's no way to tell. They have no idea whether this person was at their event or not. So how are you supposed to take care of the people? How are you supposed to take care of your members, take care of your guests, when you don't even know who's at your event? It becomes a much more significant issue when some type of injury or accident has occurred. And the second thing I wanted to touch on here, and I realize this may not be the first thing that's going through an undergraduate's mind, but here you are, you're a member of PIKE Alpha. You're a member of this organization, you're paying dues. You want to take care of the people that are there. And you're also taking on all this additional responsibility and liability in hosting this event. So why would you just open it up to the general public? Why would you just let anybody into this thing that you're paying money for and have spent all this time and energy organizing? Seems like you'd want to have a really first-rate event for the people that are in your chapter and the people that you care about and want to take care of, like your invited guests. That just seems to make logical sense to me. So, yes, guest lists are important. 3-to-1 ratio. Moving along here, number 10. Any event or activity related to the new member joining process, i.e. recruitment, intake, rush, shall be substance-free. No alcohol or drugs may be present if the event or activity is related to new member activities, meetings, or initiation into the fraternity, including but not limited to bid night and any ritual or ceremony. So here we are, recruitment, new member process. Break this down for me, Lance.
I think it's pretty plain and simple, Justin. No alcohol during recruitment or in the new member activity or new member orientation. That's that new 30-day window for new member activities that we have now. No alcohol during the recruitment leading up to that or after that and during that time window. And that applies to everything from local customs or traditions, perhaps, that chapters might have, a mentor-mentee activities, or even our own ritual. PIKE Alpha is a ritual that's outlined in our ritual book.
So working backwards, right? It's initiation evening, the 30-day new member process, recruitment, and not just, rush week, but, we want all of our chapters to participate in summer recruitment, right? But any of those kind of events, recruitment events, alcohol-free, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Even the celebration of bid day.
Yep.
Moving along, number 11, the chapter members or guests shall not permit, encourage, coerce, glorify, or participate in any activities involving the rapid consumption, such as drinking games.
Yeah, rapid consumption, drinking games, and while I know that they can be perceived as a lot of fun, it really comes down to how much you're drinking and how fast. Some of these activities can really impair you pretty quickly. And again, trying to take care of members, trying to take care of guests. And let's be honest, most people, young or old in many cases, they'd have no idea how alcohol impacts their body. Yes, we have educational programs on it, et cetera. People have read things, but most people have no idea how quickly alcohol can impact them. And so anytime you're engaged in drinking games, it can just lead to some really bad things. And that's why, in conjunction with fraternity events, we just can't have any drinking games associated with fraternity events. So that kind of, we went through the first section. I think we said there were 6 of them, right?
Yes,
so the next one here is hazing, and it's a very serious topic. And unfortunately, there are just far too many examples of hazing events and activities which have led to some really horrific outcomes and negative impacts that have impacted fraternities, chapters, and families and young men in really traumatic ways. So right out of the gate here, no member or chapter shall conduct hazing activities. That's number one.
Not much needed here, Justin. No member shall conduct hazing activities, period. We'll break down some of these a little bit further. Any activity that might reasonably be expected to bring embarrassment or psychological harm to the individual.
Yeah, so there's a lot of elements to these hazing ones, right, and how they're defined and broken down. One time I was asked, well, like, can you send me a list of everything that's considered hazing? And I don't really want to get into that. I think I saw a university produce a list of 72 things, like literally the number was 72. But even that wasn't all encompassing, right? So I think, the key phrase in this first bullet here is might reasonably be expected, okay? It doesn't mean that an injury or any kind of embarrassment did occur, it just means that it could occur. And so if you're unsure of something, I would suggest asking somebody, asking an alum, asking another member, calling the National Fraternity Office, or apply what I like to think of as the reasonable person test, right? Would a reasonable person, I'm talking a reasonable person, okay? Would they view this objectively? I don't know subjective commentary here, but would they view this activity, if it was objectively described to them, as something that could reasonably cause embarrassment or harm? I think guys ought to pause and think about that for a second. Our next bullet here under hazing is any activity that might reasonably be expected to bring physical harm to the individual.
Physical harm. It seemed pretty straightforward, right? In addition, this would include physical activities like calisthenics, box squats, wall squats, push-ups. None of these activities are essential to the development of a young man to be a member of Pi Kappa Alpha. Having members all required to work out together even would also apply in this scenario.
Yeah, you mentioned working out. Physical fitness being of sound mind and body. That's totally reasonable for anyone, Pike or not, right? But I know we both had some conversations with groups in the past that not only did they have workouts, but they had workouts at 5 o'clock in the morning. I can assure you, it was a long time ago, as somebody who used to be a college student, there was nothing that I wanted to do voluntarily or otherwise at 5 o'clock in the morning. And this is what we're talking about with physical activities.
Sure. Further, any activity might reasonably be expected to degrade or otherwise compromise the dignity of an individual.
So as we were just talking about, the physical aspect, some of the examples that we gave, right? Those can be pretty obvious. But in my opinion, the mental aspect of this is just as problematic and can really have a more harmful impact in the long run. This can manifest itself in numerous ways. And while you and I could potentially, come up with a bevy of what-if scenarios, again, I just suggest that the people apply the reasonable person test here. And whatever that activity is, whatever the activity is, ask yourself, does what we're about to do, whatever we're about to ask, this quiz or this test or this, whatever it is this really going to make somebody a better Pike and a better person at the end of the day? Again, can't emphasize that enough. Pausing, thinking about the activity, and like, what is the desired outcome of this activity? Our next bullet here, any activity that might reasonably be expected to require an unreasonable or inordinate amount of the individual's time, or in any manner impair the individual's academic efforts.
Everyone's in school to get an education and ultimately graduate, right? Putting people in a hole, demanding too much of their time as a new member especially, isn't helpful. Whether it's unnecessary duties, something like house hours, study hours, we have to spend an inordinate amount of time at chapter houses, that doesn't help. Even if it is studying. I don't know about you, but I don't think there's a whole lot of studying gets done in such large groups. This applies to late night activities too, like sober phone or designated driver programs, running to get meals, late night dinners, snacks, etc., or whatever it may be. First of all, if it's only for new members, it's probably hazing. Also, no one wants to pick up the phone at 2 a.m. We have Uber for that these days.
Yeah, and I realize most undergraduates, you're a lot younger than I am, but most undergraduates probably keep a far different schedule, so maybe 2 a.m. is more normal. It certainly isn't for me. But that said, nobody wants to run and get people food or pick them up or whatever else. Again, those type of activities should be shared by the entire chapter. And again, these days, like you said, there's Uber.
Right, other alternatives. The next one, the required consumption of liquid, gas, or solid matter.
Yeah, well, I think we covered this pretty well earlier in the alcohol section. It bears repeating. No required consumption of anything, period. And I'd also want to make a point here. I think we can move past this. Well, it was optional. Like you and I both know that's a load of BS. If you have a bunch of new members together or even individually, and you're the initiate, you are in the position that they want to be. I mean, there's a power play there, right? A power position, and you have leverage, inherent leverage. And so if you present something again to an individual new member or to a group that they want to be a part of, I mean, that's inherent hazing. Okay, it may not seem obvious, but in no situation is anybody actually going to perceive that as optional. So we have just got to move past this optional stuff. All right, so our final bullet here under the hazing subsection number 1 is any requirement which compels an individual to participate in any activity which is illegal or contrary to that individual's genuine moral and or religious beliefs or contrary to the rules and regulations of the university.
Yes, sir. Telling someone to do something, especially if you're in the position of power, is illegal. What we want here is our members to feel comfortable. And by asking them or compelling them to do something that runs contrary to their own ethical or moral values or even religious beliefs. So it's having that conversation on where those members are and making sure that we're not encouraging them to compromise those level of values and ethics.
Yeah, and the first point, again, if you're telling somebody to do something illegal, that in itself is illegal, right? And
Sure.
So, it seems like that would be pretty straightforward, right?
The next one in this section, number 2, each member and new member shall refuse to participate in any hazing activity and shall refuse to permit hazing from being inflicted upon them.
That's right. Okay, so, I think this standard, what it really does is just, it reminds that this is all of our responsibilities, right? It's not just the chapter president or the risk management chair or the health and safety officer or whomever, right? All of us have a responsibility to not participate in any of these activities and prevent it from happening to others, right? And this includes new members too. And so I'm hopeful that, that this is part of, this video is something that new member classes will watch, either individually or collectively. And my message to you is if you believe you're participating in something that you shouldn't, you have an obligation to step up and say something. You can call our office, you can talk to an alumni advisor, talk to the university, call the authorities. Everybody has a shared responsibility in, addressing this hazing issue.
That's right.
The other thing I wanted to, you and I talked about this just today, like bystander intervention, right? I mean, that's been a very buzzworthy topic within all types of circles here in the last several years. But I think at PIKE Kappa Alpha, we encourage that. We don't just want our guys to sit on the sidelines. So again, if it's not something that you're directly involved with, but you see something else happening, as a member of Pi Kappa Alpha, it is part of who we are that you are going to intervene and prevent that activity from happening. Don't be a bystander. Don't just let something happen. So number 3 is the chapter statement of position on hazing. This is a document, shall be presented to each new member by the chapter's new member educator.
That's right. It's the chapter's statement position on hazing. This document's available online and should be one of the first documents or the first things presented to new members at their first meeting. It's also encouraged that each new member execute a copy of it, and that copy be given to that new member as well as held on file with the chapter.
That's right. I mean, again, chapter position on hazing, something that, along with these standards, everybody should review.
We're getting into section 3 here, sexual abuse. There's several of them, so I'll get started. Number 1, no chapter shall tolerate or condone any form of sexually abusive behavior, whether physical, mental, or emotional. This includes any actions that are demeaning to individuals, including, but not limited to, sexual assault and sexual harassment. Sexual assault will not be tolerated. And while I'm certainly hopeful that this will be pretty obvious, this includes rape, sexual misconduct, harassment, relationship violence, stalking or online stalking.
And to drive this point home further, number 2 states, each member and new member shall refuse to engage in any sexually abusive behavior. This is a critically important topic, right? You said it will not be tolerated. Period, exclamation point. This whole topic to me shouldn't really need any explanation. So not only, of course, our members, new members, anybody associated with the fraternity should not be engaged in this activity. I would just add that, I believe that it is our personal responsibility as men of this fraternity, as men of Pi Kappa Alpha, we should intervene in any situation that we encounter or perceive this to even be occurring. I think that should be a part of who we are. And so sexual assault, sexual abuse, there's just no place for it in our fraternity, or really anywhere for that matter.
Well, for these 3 sections that we've already covered, we talked a lot about in our education bystander intervention. This video serves as a part of it, educating our members. The second part, intervening in those activities, you just talked about it. And the last part, should it be applicable, is that accountability piece.
That's right. The basis of our health and safety program. Expectations, intervention, accountability. I'm glad you mentioned that. So that takes us to the 4th section here, 4th section in our standards, which is fire, health, and safety. Lance, why don't you kick us off here?
All chapter houses should at all times comply with local fire and health codes and standards. It would probably be a good idea to invite your local fire marshal to review these policies on an annual basis.
Yeah, I mean, bring in the experts, right, to talk about what the local codes and ordinances are. Number 2, all chapters should post emergency numbers for fire, police, and ambulance in common areas. Evacuation routes for the building should be posted on the back door of each sleeping room. Seems pretty straightforward. Number 3 in this section, all chapters and housing corporations should comply with financially feasible and reasonable engineering, fire, health, or safety recommendations as submitted by the insurance company. So this whole section, fire, health, and safety, refers to a lot of, relying on expertise, relying on your house corporation, relying on the expertise of fire marshals, of insurance companies. So I think a chapter really would be best served to make sure that they're talking more openly about, all of these different topics with the experts that were referenced here. So that takes us into section number 5, which is education. And at the onset, so number 1 here, at the onset of each academic period, the chapter president shall review these standards with the entire chapter membership and submit a signed copy of the officer acknowledgement to the International Fraternity. as we've talked about a couple of times, and really the whole purpose that we're doing this video, we kind of hope that this video will serve as an introduction that our chapters and members can use before just signing off on the standards. Because the last thing we really want done is just guys to sign a piece of paper and send it in without reviewing it. Like that's not helpful. We want people to actually have an understanding of what it is that these standards stand for.
Absolutely. These are not the terms and conditions agreement that we've sometimes become accustomed to of just checking yes and flippantly moving on. We want them to make sure that they read them and they are clear with what these expectations outline. Number 2 in this section is each chapter shall maintain a written health and safety program, including proper risk management practices, that is presented to the entire chapter membership on an annual basis. Reviewing this will help setting expectations and reinforcing the standards, but also expectations to the chapter, but also identifying strategies in which we can intervene and to make it easier, and I want to underscore, make it easier for all our members and our guests to meet those standards. These written program like this, we have one on the fraternity website in our health and safety program. It outlines gives a rubric of that, but part of some of the things that could be included in that are not only the fraternity's health and safety guidelines, the standards, chapter statement and position on hazing, university policies, IFC policies as it relates to Greek organizations, the university social policies perhaps, but as well as membership contracts, all of this being readily available to all our members via an online platform or some type of shared services cloud-based program platform.
Yeah, I think the point you're trying to make there is like the health and safety program is not exclusively the responsibility of the health and safety chairman or the chapter president, right? Like, get all the resources in a central location so that everybody has access to them, and there can be, a greater understanding by the entire membership. So that takes us to, number 3 in education. And it says each chapter shall maintain a written new member orientation program that is conducted as part of the member onboarding process, which shall not exceed 30 days. So this 30-day concept, as you know, this was a decision that recently has been endorsed by our chapter presidents at a recent PIKE University event. And also, while I think 30 days, it's there's a lot of organizations that have moved that direction. Our fraternity is now obligated to follow this 30-day time frame as a result of a recent lawsuit that came about as a result of a really unfortunate tragedy that has really impacted the fraternity and a family, and it's a very sad event. So there's no moving back from this. Fraternity's process is 30 days moving forward. So as far as this 30-day plan is concerned, though, right, it should consist of a detailed new member educator's handbook, a new member educator's guide, a calendar, PowerPoint slides to help with facilitating. And the good news is all of those resources that I just mentioned, there are some templates available on the fraternity's website, so you don't have to start and develop these things from scratch. But what it shouldn't be is just a one-page document with an outline on it. New member orientation, just think about corporate orientation, getting your first job. You don't just give somebody a one-page job description and that's it. I mean, there's a much more robust process to that. And really the 30-day new member period, which we're moving forward with, it needs to include all of the things that we just talked about and probably more.
Sure. The 4th one in this section is each chapter shall meet minimum attendance levels for every type of PIKE University event, with higher attendance encouraged for our leadership summits. So regional leadership summits, it outlines 5. This is a great opportunity for our new members, especially our new members because it's closer to home. The cost would be a little bit less than some of our other events. But to see a bigger picture of what Pi Kappa Alpha is or could be, contrary to whatever it is at their respective institution and their local chapter. The second event is our Chapter Executives Conference, our CEC in Memphis in January. We ask for 3, usually our president, treasurer, and recruitment chairmen for those tracks and those roles. And then we have our Academy, which is our summer event. It outlines for 3. This is another opportunity, a robust catalog of education that we provide to our members and our volunteers. Every member is encouraged to attend at least one PIKE University event during the undergraduate experience. We know that chapters that participate in PIKE University are far more successful.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned it's in a standard here, and it's unfortunate. It shouldn't even be in a standard, right? I mean, and most of the guys you talk to that have gone to 2, 3, 4, 5 events, I mean, they have a great time. Of course, as you mentioned, their chapters end up being wildly more successful. So, you know, leadership summits, we have people that come back year after year after year and to really just enhance their PIKE experience.
That's right. We have certification for it.
Yeah. I can't say enough good things about PIKE University. So our last section here within the standard, section 6, is advisory support. And again, this is a fairly, you know, recent add to the standards, but I think an important one. So the first one here says, each chapter shall maintain an accredited chapter advisor. Now, you know, most chapters don't even realize that they elect their chapter advisor. It's in the chapter codes. They can elect them on an annual basis or more frequently as needed, but at least they probably ought to affirm them on an annual basis. I think the part I want to touch on here is the accreditation word. So what is accreditation? We do have, and I know you've been involved with this, the online accreditation, you know, that has chapter volunteers, chapter advisors specifically, go through and understand what the standards are, the chapter codes, the Constitution, and just some of the broad kind of structural elements of the fraternity. So that's the accreditation system for chapter advisors.
That's right. Our last one, and the last one really for the standards, is each chapter shall maintain an alumni advisory board consisting of no fewer than 3 individuals, ideally 6 or more. Gone are the days of having a single chapter advisor. It's been long gone. Chapters have AEBs that help perform these tasks. I mean, for our advisory boards, in terms of operations, as a rule, there are 6 areas of operation we're looking at from an advisory board to help support the executive board. But really, if we look at the entire organization chart for most of our chapters, there's 16 sub areas of operations. This is an opportunity not on for a minimum expectation for volunteers. We hope it'd be more than that, but for our alumni to really play a key role in the development of our young leaders for the next generation of PIKE.
Yeah, and again, like this advisory piece, you know, it's in the standards clearly, but it's really just a great operating practice, right? And I think if you look at the chapters that win Smythe Awards year after year, that are Excellence Award winners, or heck, are just even open for a long period of time, right? I mean, it's because they have consistent alumni advisory support. And yes, chapters go through some ebbs and flows, and that's natural with an organization made up of college students. But the ones that have that constant advisory backbone and support tend to perform better over the long term. So.
That's right. Our chapters rotate, you know, every year. We transition officers, which is probably unique to other businesses or other organizations out there. And our entire chapter population changes over every 4 years. So these volunteers provide continuity year over year, and especially when we transition leadership.
All right. Well, so we made it through the standards. Lance, I appreciate you spending some time here with me and breaking this down. I do hope you know, this is helpful for the guys and the chapters and members, and even some of our volunteers are able to put this to good use. I know that, you know, reading the standards and going over this at a chapter meeting isn't always the easiest thing to do, but now at least there's a chance to kind of reinforce some of these topics and maybe, you know, follow up with it a little bit on an individual basis. You know, I still find it surprising though that, you know, when I hear an undergraduate say, oh, I wasn't aware of that, or I wasn't aware of the policy or the rule or the regulation or whatever it was. So hopefully this just doesn't stop at the standards, right? I mean, yes, our members need to be aware of the standards, but I think we've talked about it throughout this video. There's a Constitution and chapter codes. There's the institution's rules and policies. There's IFC bylaws. There's, you know, the chapter bylaws. So there's a lot of things to go over. We'll cover those maybe on a different video. So anyway, hope that this was beneficial and helpful to all of you out there. And again, if you ever have any follow-up questions on any of the fraternity standards or anything else, please don't hesitate to give our office a call. We look forward to seeing you soon.